Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great America Show. It's great to have you with us. We're now just 67 days away from the 2024 election. And so far this election cycle, we've had an incumbent candidate be forced out of the race, a wildly popular independent candidate drop out of the race and throw his support behind a Republican. And hell, we even had a political candidate be indicted on criminal charges. So I don't think there's any argument to be had. This election cycle is the most historic in the nation's history. Just last week, we had the DNC wrap up, and still we have no clarity from the Democrats on their message to the American people. What did we hear? We heard Donald Trump's name mentioned 300 times, 150 times on the first day alone. To me, that seems highly peculiar to have that name mentioned at the DNC convention of the man you despise most. Where was the messaging to the American people? What was the message that you were going to tell us so that you're all going to fix everything? Inflation, gas prices, grocery costs, foreign policy. We do have two wars overseas that we are funding, but of course there was none of that because the Democrats have no plan. So what is the polling telling us right now between President Trump and Kamala Harris? Should we even believe these polls? Why are they so tight? I want to bring in our guest today and get his take on it. He's Mark Mitchell. He's the leading pollster for Rasmussen. Mark, it's great to have you with us. First, I want to get your take on national polling numbers right now between Kamala Harris and President Donald J. Trump post-convention.
Absolutely. And let me first say, I'm really happy to be here. We greatly respected Lou Dobbs at Rasmussen Reports. I love honesty, and you could just tell that every pore of his being exudes complete and total honesty. And I think we need more of that in political discourse. But we released so much national polling last week, two very major polls, a 2,600 US likely voter poll that was done up until the first 2 days of the DNC. And in a direct two-way matchup, we had Donald Trump winning by 2 points, 48%, to Kamala Harris, 46%. And in a multi-way matchup, he was actually up 3 points, 47 to 44. And that might be a surprise to people, but Donald Trump is winning nationally. In the other poll we released a day later that he had data up on the third day of the DNC, we had Donald Trump up 3 points in a two-way and then 2 points in a three-way. So it's a 2 to 3 point race nationally for Donald Trump. We've also been doing nightly polling and releasing a chart on our Twitter feed that kind of tracks the race, so you don't have to wait every Thursday for our numbers to drop. And what I can tell you is the last 2 days of the DNC and going into Friday, there were nights when Trump and Harris were tied in those individual nightly results. But after the RFK endorsement, and then again on Monday night, Trump was up 1 point and now 2 points in those national results. So what it looks like to me is that Kamala Harris got maybe a mediocre bounce, nothing like what you'll see everywhere else in the polling industry, and that Donald Trump is returning about back to where he has been for the last couple of weeks, is up comfortably 2 to 3 points. Maybe we'll see 4 with the RFK endorsement. I don't know. I don't want to predict too much. But I think the big point to talk about is all of those lists of just absolutely crazy political happenings, and it didn't really change our numbers that much at all. Now, it changed everybody else's numbers in the industry, but I'm here to tell you we didn't shift any of our weighting. We didn't oversample Biden supporters. We aren't playing around with our regional targeting. And Trump was up 4 to 5 points by the end with Biden. Now he's up, 2 to 3 points, but she is a better candidate in some ways than Joe Biden. She fogs the mirror, and that's a pretty critical thing. And so the race tightened. And I think we can all look around and say, subject to maybe a black swan or two, this could be her high watermark, which would just be absolutely cataclysmic for Democrats, because Donald Trump really didn't come anywhere close to being up in the national popular vote in the last 2 cycles.
And I think historically he underperforms in the polls, as we all know. The truth of the matter is, I think, and you let me know if you disagree with me on this, is that you could have put anybody up. You could have probably put the most hated man in America up, aside from Donald Trump, according to the Democrats, in place of Joe Biden, and there would have been this honeymoon period because there's excitement for a new candidate, fresh blood or whatever you want to call it. Is that what I'm reading? Am I reading into that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff happened all at once, and it's really tough to figure out what exactly was running through people's minds. I will say there's one additional factor, and if you look at our polling going back all the way in 21 and 22 for a 2024 rematch, numbers were kind of big Trump lead, but all over the place. And what happens when you lead up into the final months of an election cycle is somewhere along the way, maybe at the end of the summer, maybe after something like the Supreme Court decision that happened in the 22 cycle,
Right.
everybody just wakes up, starts paying attention to the news, the advertising money gets put out there. And what happened after that debate is that the numbers just lasered in. They weren't swinging around much anymore. And Democrats woke up big and they actually kind of rallied support around Biden. And I think it was a reaction to, like, oh my God, Trump might win this. I think that was probably the biggest result. And they entered this mental state where it's like, okay, circle the wagons, blue no matter who. Sure, we'll support a border wall now. Don't care that we were calling people racist for the last 10 years when they talked about border wall. So it really is this kind of, and again, like Trump was shot. There was the RNC.
Right.
Biden dropped out. You had Obama weigh in on the race. Now you have RFK, and it's moving the numbers maybe a point. It's hard to even show like exactly what event is affecting the numbers. And that's because it's like political Armageddon. Everybody's just choosing sides.
You know, it's funny, Mark. I thought, last year when we ousted when Kevin McCarthy was ousted as Speaker of the House, that was going to be the most crazy political scene we were going to see in a long time. Come to find out that just months later, we're going to have an incumbent candidate be pushed out of his position by whether it be the Speaker of the House or the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer or all of the above. I mean, the political landscape we're in right now, I often use this joke, is Steve Harvey came out in front of a camera and told us we were all being punked for the last, we'll go, 4 or 5 years because we'll throw COVID in there as well. I would totally believe it because everything we're seeing right now is just wildly insane, according to any person's standards.
Yeah, it's hard to see what the calculus is when these events happen because an isolated individual event like the Kevin McCarthy thing will show up and us politicos will say, wow, this has never happened. It's only happened once in the country's history. It's going to change everything. And I will say that Kevin McCarthy was part of a larger nudge. People mostly didn't know about him. Republicans kind of liked him, kind of didn't. What they didn't like was the chaos that was happening in the House and how those optics, in my opinion, piled up on top of the 2022 underperformance. Right. People basically just thought, well, Republicans don't have their act together. And that was impacting Trump's numbers negatively and also fanning Ron DeSantis's flame. So in that sort of February period, DeSantis was taking home maybe 50% of what Trump was. It was like 48 to 24, something like that. And then all of a sudden, what shifted wasn't entirely just the indictment. It's also DeSantis declaring his presidential candidacy while the indictment happened, on top of the fact that Biden ignored that big fire in East Palestine, right? All that happened at once. And it's like, oh, it's Trump's to win. The primary numbers immediately went Trump. DeSantis' favorability dropped. His very favorable numbers went down 20 points among Republicans. He didn't say anything bad. He literally just did the wrong thing at the wrong time, and it added up to. So now look at Kennedy. I'm looking at that, and I'm saying, well, that's big in a way that we haven't seen before. Because
Mark, before you get into that, I want to take a quick break here because I do want to talk about that and go great into depth of that. I saw you tweeted something out before the RFK endorsement. You said something along the lines of you weren't sure if it was going to move the needle, and then I saw you tweet after the endorsement. You're like, well, holy crap, this may have moved the needle. I want to take that up on the other side of this break. So let's take a quick break here. We're coming right back with the leading pollster for Rasmussen, Mark Mitchell. We're coming right back. Stay with us. We're back. We're talking with Mark Mitchell of Rasmussen Polling. He's their leading pollster. And Mark, right before we went to break, we were talking about that RFK tweet that you had put out that you said you weren't sure if the RFK endorsement was going to move the needle. Now, a week later, what's your take on it?
Well, I'm a numbers guy and I'm a math person, and I'm looking at the crosstabs and I say, well, RFK really doesn't have that much support. He started in the low teens, but the last couple of times we polled, he's been in the 3 to 5 point range. For him to come out with a 3% number and then say, like, listen, he's been a lifelong Democrat. He's got some really leftist policies. But yet maybe he has an edge and more Republican voters would vote for him because I think the Republicans are the party of open-mindedness right now
Yeah.
and trying to fix the system. And so I looked at that mathematically and said, well, he's maybe Trump incrementally gets like a half a point. And I think a lot of people's analysis came out to a similar number as ours. I went through it in great detail in a YouTube video, but the number was like 0.5 to 0.7 points. And then all of a sudden, he had that speech that was just packed with unassailable data that the left could only run from. You will not see anybody try and fact check that. They can't allow that amount of cognitive dissonance inside the bubble. They can't threaten the advertisers. They can't threaten the worship of science. And not only that, the fact that he called Kamala Harris and she wouldn't pick up the phone in a speech that was talking about the lives and death of children in our country.
Right.
And then to follow it up, he shows up at that campaign event with pyrotechnics. Like
Right.
I couldn't believe Friday it was the, and not only that, there was even a little bit of palace intrigue, a little bit of leaks about maybe he's not going to endorse Trump. The entire thing was, it was like some kind of produced event.
Right.
And I don't think anybody could have predicted or expected the amount of optics that'll come out of that. Now, I will say the RNC was, I think, similar, the type of vibe that it created. And I think Scott Adams is correct. This is a bit of a vibe election, but there might be some people on the fence that say, look at this Democrat. I remember JFK,
Right.
systems corrupt. And that over the long term, I think is going to give Trump probably more of a tailwind in a way that we probably won't be able to see in the numbers, but it certainly isn't going to hurt him.
You know, the interesting thing about the whole, you'd mentioned the disinformation around the whole RFK endorsement. And you had the Democrats during the DNC, the final days when we were expecting the announcement from RFK when that court document from Pennsylvania got leaked that he was, pulling out of the ballot so he could endorse Trump. You had all these, people on Twitter saying, well, like you said, he might not endorse him because he had a problem with Trump over Operation Warp Speed and not taking credit for the vaccines and all that stuff. And then you had people come out saying RFK's wife, Cheryl Hines. For people who don't know Cheryl Hines, she's an actress, a Hollywood actress, and she was on, I think, one of the longest television shows in history, Curb Your Enthusiasm, with Larry David, who's a known Marxist Democrat. So by him endorsing it, it puts his wife in this really peculiar place. And on Twitter, you'd see, I don't think RFK is going to do it because of his wife. Now we hear from RFK in an interview with Tucker Carlson that his wife was actually the one who pushed him to take the meeting with Trump. So, you just have disinformation after misinformation. You had the DNC saying Beyonce was coming to sort of, block out, the light that RFK was going to, and I, could have never imagined that he'd come out there like a damn rock star. And, I think even Trump looking at him coming out there and he's like, Trump's not oftenly starstruck, but Trump's looking at him like, what the hell is going on here? But I think, to get back on topic here, these Democrats who are now coming over to the side of Republicans, I think it says a lot about what they think about the establishment and what they think about Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. You have Tulsi Gabbard also this week. And now you're also hearing that Congressman Dean Phillips of Minnesota, Tim Walz's country, I should say, is open to maybe endorsing President Trump. Do you expect we see more of this? Does it move the needle further than we've already seen it?
Well, I think it's going to be a cumulative effect. I think if somebody asked me, like, numerically, how will Tulsi Gabbard impact Trump's? So we're going into the field to try and measure that now. The answer is like, I don't know, 0.1%, right? Who knows? But it's the optics of momentum. And it's the cracking of this wall that I think the Democrats have built around the mentality of their movement. It can't be challenged internally, and to have major defectors is an important thing. Like I personally think there are some irrational and illogical things that are harming the country in the psyche of the left. And I could point to a million examples. Our COVID polling is one of them. And I think, like Kennedy, a Democrat, that needs to be corrected. And these kinds of challenges to their narrative, I think, are healthy because people should be talking to each other. People shouldn't be dismissing each other for being racist. And the right is obviously guilty of these things as well. But look at how they're embracing Kennedy right now. So it's like, where will this momentum go? I don't know. Already in my overnight numbers, Trump's up 1, now 2 points.
Right.
And it's like, that's where he was before, but these things are never, it drifts with the timing, it drifts with response bias. There's a whole lot of other things in play. But Trump is now gaining the upper hand with momentum for sure.
You mentioned something interesting, and it's something we don't have anymore, and it's discussion. There's no such thing as political discourse because you cannot argue or talk, have a normal conversation with someone about Donald Trump. There's something that sets off in these people's minds, Mark, that I don't know what it is, but it like loosens a bolt and they go insane. I have a sister who's, on the left side. She doesn't like Trump. She doesn't like his rhetoric. She doesn't like his stance on abortion, whatever. And, we're talking about it. I said, do you ever talk to people when she works in corporate America? Do you talk to people who work about it? No, we can't talk about it. I said, but, do you guys talk about like the war in Ukraine or the war in Israel? And she goes, yeah, well, we talk about that. And I said, well, that's political. So why can't you talk policy? If you mention Donald Trump's name to a far left Democrat, it's automatically he's a criminal. And how do you have a conversation from there? He's a crook. He's this. He's that. He's that. There's no such thing as political discourse in this country anymore, and I think it's extremely unhealthy. And it's very unhealthy for these people who just can't seem to listen. For us who had to deal with, and you're nonpartisan, but for us who had to deal with Obama, we hated it. We dealt with it, but we still had conversations. There were normal conversations. The same thing under George Bush. There's something that sets these people off about Donald Trump. I don't know if it's the alpha male complex, but it makes zero sense to me. I want to go to a headline real quick from Politico talking about fake news. Political claims that J.D. Vance tries to tether Harris to the Biden-Harris administration. Does that make any sense to you? The Biden-Harris administration, are we not supposed to talk about their record of inflation, their record of gas prices, their record of everything that's gone wrong in this damn country? What are we supposed to do?
That article, I think, is the one that was community noted in one of the most beautiful community notes I've ever seen. God bless Elon. And Twitter, I think he is trying to restore dialogue in this country. And you can see that it was met as if it was some kind of virus attacking the host. And I think there's a couple of things going on. And I think clearly the media is the biggest culprit here. And you can say, all right, well, they've been co-opted by something bigger. And I think you're right there. 60% of voters think the media is the enemy of the people. That number is not high enough. I think they're preying upon people and filling vacuums. I think there's two things that are affecting the discourse in this country. I think one of them is the willingness of the elite and the media class to attempt to change the rules of the game to win and stay in power. And by that, I mean
midway through the game, that is.
Yeah. Right. They want to redefine what America is, because we've always been about freedom and independence and discussion and First Amendment. That they're changing that in a way that is killing discourse. And I think that's one of the values our country was built on. I think this goes into the Platonic dialectic and this aspect of classical Western values that was a part of our founding. And another strong part of our founding is this Judeo-Christian tradition that permeates every aspect of the way our country was built. And I have some pretty fascinating numbers I haven't seen anybody talking about at all. I think there's an aspect of religion to this. Mm-hmm. In our big 2,600 person poll, Donald Trump wins by 31 points among evangelical Christians. Wow. He wins 7 points among Protestants. He wins 11 among Catholic voters. He's tied among Jewish voters in this poll. Maybe it was a small sample.
Which is a disgrace, by the way, I should say. It really is a disgrace. Yeah.
He wins even among Muslim voters. Again, a small sample. But where he loses is he loses massively among atheists. 83% Harris to 9% Trump. And that is even bigger than Harris's lead among her own party voters. Wow. And Donald Trump also loses among everyone else, 58% to 34%. So that's agnostics, Wiccans, right, Satan worshipers, whatever. And Donald Trump wins with everyone. Donald Trump wins with everybody except people who say they rarely or never attend church. So I think the aspect, humans are spiritual beings. I think the left has supplanted religious dogma with political dogma in a way that has not been healthy for the country.
You had mentioned earlier in there the media distrust, and I agree with you. I was at Fox News with Lou for years, and I witnessed firsthand how things were done, how the higher ups in the company would try to push shows on how to do stories. And to be full disclosure, Lou's show never had that. There was never anybody coming from the top down saying you're going to run this or you're going to run that, because Lou would look him right in the eye and say, "Go to hell. It's my show. Either fire me or I'm running my show." And that's
Love it.
I think that's how it should be. For someone to go in there and take a paycheck and sell your soul, it's pathetic. It really is sad, because at the end of the day, it's money is money. You die with your heart and your soul. The money doesn't die with you. So the media dishonesty it's all of them. It's Fox News, it's CNN, it's MSNBC, and some are worse than others. But across the board, it's like these people are criminals. What the brainwashing and stuff that they're doing to America. I mean, you look at the assassination attempt on President Trump. What part of the media did the media play in that to persuade this 20-year-old kid to go out there and want to shoot a president? It's truly disheartening what the media has done to this country.
There's no intellectual honesty or introspection. I think
because there's no accountability, Mark.
Yeah. I think the word accountability is close. I think the word is integrity.
Yeah.
And I think the drug everybody's on right now is a lack of integrity. And there's a lot of different paths to having integrity. Going to church and believing in a higher power and worship. Joining the military. The military instills integrity. I went to a school that would have kicked me out if I lied once.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if our military institutions lose integrity like every other institution in the country? And that's what happens when you go get an MBA and go to the higher levels of Fortune 500 companies.
Right.
You have to please your boss. And if your integrity is on the line, or if you have somebody from the DNC sending you talking points every morning, and nobody knows but you. And once you sell it, it's really hard to get it back. And I don't know how to poll on it. I'd love to figure out how to test people's integrity, but I'm open to ideas.
It's truly is pathetic. But now I think, you're seeing a big switch here. And I think it's in the poll, showing in the polling too. Back in 2016, I'll admit it. I was nervous to wear my Trump hat around my college campus because of what people would think of me. Now I was on a flight last month to Europe, and a guy walks past me down the aisle wearing a "Make America Great Again" hat on his way to France. So I think that political landscape, as for that, is definitely transferring, and people are proud to say that they stand with the America First candidate. The other thing you mentioned is integrity. And I used to joke with Lou all the time, and I used to tell him, you have way too much integrity to be in this damn business. He always double checked and triple checked everything he did. Any contract that was given to him, he read it 6 times. Any advertiser response, he always wanted to know everything that he was pushing, everything that he was telling the audience, everything he was asking the audience to go buy or whatever. Double, triple check. And I just tell him, Lou, you got way too much integrity. But you know what? It was something that he died with, and I think people see it. We're going to take a quick break here, Mark. When we return, I want to talk about Trump's pathway forward, how he wins this thing in November, and I want to get into independents and what they mean for either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump come November 5th. We're talking with Mark Mitchell of Rasmussen. We're coming right back. Stay with us. We're back. We're talking with Mark Mitchell of Rasmussen. Mark, before we went to break, I went into independents. A new poll out from economists in YouGov has Trump up 5 percentage points over Kamala Harris among independents. For the audience, can you tell us, if you will, what percentage of the voters in America are independents and where they sit right now as it pertains to November 5th?
That question is definitely up for debate, and it's one of the big levers that everybody's playing around with. It's also one of the big levers where if you were trying to get a certain result in your polling, one of the ones that you'd mess around with, because you could hide some bodies in there. But independents are key because they're about 1/3 of the electorate. It depends on the election, depends on whether there's a president or it's off cycle. A lot more people, in my opinion, are independents than they have been before. And it doesn't necessarily always match the voter registration numbers. Right. Somebody might be registered Republican and they'd be totally sick with the establishment and call themselves independent in a poll. One of the reasons that we differ is that we poll entirely likely voters. So we are not starting with the registration file. And we're not doing other things that people do, like trying to force them to lean, with one party or another. We let independents be independents. And because of that, when we do our party weightings, it might differ from other people's polls. the way we poll, to be accurate, we think that independents are 32% of the electorate. Democrats are 35, Republicans are 33. So independents are almost as big as Republicans there, and maybe even this time out bigger. And so that, I mean, we saw them going for Biden in our polling in 2020 by almost double digits.
Wow.
Right now, we have Trump winning independents in every single poll we've tested from 5 to 20 points. He's had polls where he's won by 20 points among independents. Now, that might be different parts of the cycle, but what it comes down to is if Harris wins every Democrat and she only gets to 35%. So she has to get a lot of independents. And if Donald Trump wins a majority of the independents, you know, if he wins a slim majority and wins every Republican, that gets him to parity. A big majority, the race is his. But what is interesting about independents is how right they've shifted on every single question, on every single issue. They hated Afghanistan. They do not like the weaponization of the political system. They hate what's happening in the border. They give Republicans an advantage on every single issue, pretty much, except for like abortion. They are worried about the economy. They trust Trump and the Republicans better on the economy by like double digits. And what's wild is that you can look in Real Clear Politics at every one of these other mainstream polls, and they're showing Trump losing among independents.
Right.
And so if we're massively wrong, it will be because we got our independent polling incorrect, but we were right in 2016, right in 2020, and they've all shifted towards Trump.
The thing that's so interesting to me is how unlikable Kamala Harris is. You can say what you want about Trump. I've met the man many times. He's in person. He's the same person you get, you know, off camera. Maybe a little bit more fun in person. Kamala Harris is just a total phony. And for anyone who doesn't see that, I guess you're blinded by it. But, you know, the highest turnover rate, I think, of any vice president in history tells you something. She's, you know, you can't work for the woman. She's, you know, not a good boss. You know, for President Trump, like I said, I think he's a human. He's a human being. The way he speaks to the American people, the way he has the American people relate to him. Whereas Kamala Harris goes on camera and you get that cackling laugh that's just so absurd. I want to dive into some numbers here on how President Trump can win. The big states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, possibly. We'll call it the three, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin as of right now. And, you know, the problem I take with Real Clear Politics averages is that they put in these garbage polls that are just massive fluff polls. Well, you'll have Harris up nationally 12 or 13 points. Nobody believes that. I'm sure you would agree with me on that, that if there's a 13-point race, then we have a bigger problem here. So we'll go according to the Real Clear Politics. They've got a safe seat of Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina for President Trump. So leaving out Pennsylvania, assuming Harris wins Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, puts the race at 251 to 268. Pennsylvania puts Trump over the top if he were to win that. I don't have much faith in, we were speaking before the show, in the voters in Pennsylvania. You said you don't have much faith in the government of Pennsylvania. What are some other paths forward if Trump were to lose Pennsylvania? Let's talk New Hampshire. The latest polling has Harris up 5 with a margin of error of 2.2. With New Hampshire, puts Trump over the top from 268 over the top to 272. New Jersey is one that we've heard recently. The latest polling out of New Jersey I saw had, and that's from June, it was Trump versus Biden. It was Trump +1. You have now Kamala Harris. The last polling out of Virginia, the last 3 polls out of Virginia, Harris +3 with a margin of error of 4 and 4.5, which carries 13 electoral votes. Do you think there is any way forward for President Trump if he were to lose Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin?
I'm going to make a lot of generalizations here, but I think in my numbers, in Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Georgia, he's essentially tied within the margin of error in a massive poll that was taken literally at the height of Kamala Harris's support. Okay. And not only that, in 3 of those 6 states, I have numbers from 2020, and he's doing 6 to 7 points better than our polling had him doing in 2014 20. So I think the big story is all of the state polling last cycle was like 5 to 7 points to Biden, and everybody was totally surprised by how Trump turned out a massive amount of people in the battlegrounds
Right.
in a national popular vote that was by far favoring Biden.
Right.
So I think there's a chance, and I'll tell you, I have not really shifted my weighting that much since 2020. I
Mhm.
think there's a chance that he outperforms in every single one of these swing states versus where I have him at now, again, which is tied. And so I
Interesting.
think his path is he's going to, like, let's not even talk about New Hampshire. Let's not talk about Virginia. There's a chance that individual state differences, maybe Youngkin getting in and doing a good job or cleaning up his voter rolls, maybe those things will impact that state different. Maybe people really hate Murphy and what he's done in New Jersey. I don't know. But my point is, I think he might run away with all six of the ones that matter when I think he only needs like three.
Right.
So, I think at this point, looking at my numbers, Georgia and Arizona are essentially a done deal. If you average all the Arizona numbers we've hit out since 2022, he's up like 5 to 6 points. Tied in Michigan when all the polls lean left, not
Mhm.
good for Harris. Up two in Nevada when all the polls lean left, tied in Pennsylvania. We have Trump up one in the two-way in Pennsylvania. And that is doing 6 points better than Trump did in 2020 in Pennsylvania. So I would say everybody, here's the other thing to notice. Go to Real Clear Politics and just count the number of state polls. I wouldn't
Interesting.
even look at the polling out there. There's just not enough of it. And the polling companies, it's like they spent their entire cycle's budget on June and July. They've put out hardly any polling at all. A lot of the states only have like one or two polls. They're really small. I think Nevada was one of them, like 600 people from two places. Maybe it was Minnesota. Wait until more polling gets out. We'll be back in hopefully multiple times before the end of the race. Let's clear data from the DNC because again, I think that this is an anomaly. Trump was up 1 to 5 points in every swing state back in July against Biden. I think she's going to get closer to where Biden's numbers are than gain any more from here.
The thing that's appalling to me, and I mentioned to you this earlier, is people's, uh, I should say, no hesitancy of being wrong. You would think these pollsters and these outlets like the New York Times and Economist and YouGov and WAPO and everyone who does polling just want to be right. We've learned from 2016 that a lot of these polls are incorrect and maybe on purpose, maybe not on purpose, as a way to dissuade the voters from coming out and voting. They're not fooling the voters anymore. The Trump voters, I think, are the most enraged and patriotic voters we've seen probably out of a presidential candidate in a long time, maybe since Ronald Reagan. So why do you think that these pollsters are putting out these 5, 6, 12, 13-point fluff polls for Kamala Harris? What are they trying to do?
There's so much going on here, and I'll point fingers for sure, but you can never know. People talk about transparency. There is no amount of polling transparency that will make up for somebody who sold their integrity. They could
Right.
give me the data, and I still wouldn't know if they collected it correctly from all the right sources, right? I think there are absolutely some crooked polling where they put their thumb on the scales and maybe oversample this and that and don't tell anybody. Then there's shifts in weighting where you like pull more Biden supporters from 2020 than you did a week ago and don't tell anybody.
Right.
Then there's like literally New York Times Siena came out and talked about how they think their polls lean left and they're oversampling Biden people, and they've chosen not to correct for it with 2020 recall vote because of all of these ivory tower reasons. And then you have 538 taking their
Yeah.
numbers and moving them even farther left. And then finally, you have the press being Democrat cheerleaders in a way that I think the pollsters can't control or are a victim to. And then there's collusion. The New York Times, Siena, I'm sure, has been working with people to selectively drop polls that were bad for Trump in very selected swing states when there was no polling going on in the industry. They literally stopped for like the first 2 weeks of August after a president was shot, another one dropped out. They picked a VP. There was like no polling going. There's more polling going on in a random week in March than in the beginning of August. So that one is corrupt as well. And then the Fairleigh Dickinson poll that everybody's talking about, I think, is a really good example also. Your viewers might not be familiar with that one, but this was an experimental poll a college put out. I don't know who the profs are or the students, whatever. I mean, it was probably good work. They did some great stuff where they asked men how masculine you are and then broke down how people went for Trump versus by masculinity. Fascinating. I never thought to do that. But then they also asked a 2024 matchup and showed that Trump was down, I think, maybe a point. Okay, fair enough, right? And then they asked some questions about race and gender, and then asked the matchup again and showed that when primed with race and gender questions, Donald Trump is now down 7 points. Then the Hill came out and ran everywhere with the headline that Trump's losing by 7 points in the national popular poll. And it went all over the place on Twitter. And of course, nobody read the article. And now everybody's yelling at fairly. These poor people, they might not have. So that's the environment we're in. And it's because the press, corporate press, TM, is an arm of the Democrat Party right now. And they cannot stomach dissent. That's why they kicked us out of 538. And look at 538. They're a prediction model. Nate Silver's doing this too. I know he thinks he's doing it for the right reasons, but their model is supposed to correct for biases. So when you have multiple pollsters coming out and saying all of the polling is leaning to left, and yet the Real Clear Politics aggregates like 1.5 points, 2 points Harris, but then their prediction model is 4 points Harris, like, what are they correcting for? Right. They're going the wrong way. Right. So I think I'm constantly surprised every day by the lack of integrity, how corrupt things are. And I'm just here to say, like, we're putting out our numbers every night. Kamala Harris had a bounce. It wasn't big. The DNC's over. Trump's starting to inch back up, and Trump is winning nationally. But whatever, 1 to 3 points, call it in our numbers. But even if we're 2 or 3 points left, Trump's down 1 nationally. Right. That's a lot better than he was doing 4 years ago when he lost by only 116,000 votes in 4 swing states.
Mark, I want to follow up with this final question. It's probably a bad question to ask since we just got off a question of integrity and being right and wrong, but I will ask it this way. If the election were held tomorrow, who wins and by what margin?
Yeah, good question. I would say if Trump wins half of the swing states he's tied in, I don't know. I think we see high 200s. You know, I think he's like 290, comfortable win, barring surprises, barring they actually stop counting the vote, barring Brett Baier doesn't get involved in the elections. And that's all based on my Trump plus, 1 or 2. Nate Silver's useful. He put a nice little chart out that people could use as a slider. What's the national popular vote? And it says exactly. And if Trump's doing like 3 or 4 points, which is where I think he returns to, I think it was like 312 to, whatever. That's a huge win. And it's like, well, that makes sense. If Trump's winning 3 to 4 points and he gets in the 300s, that's where Biden did when he was winning by 4 points. Biden obviously got some help in California. So it's, that's a pretty clear race. That's where I think we're going, subject to jail sentence, subject to Biden being 25th or resigning or having a health emergency, subject to crazy things maybe happening in the debate. They could move a lot. They could move a little. Who knows?
And I guess we'll soon find out on November 5th if states like Georgia, Brian Kemp down in Georgia, or Youngkin in Virginia, and some of these other states like Arizona that are run by the Democrats, did enough, to clean up their voter rolls and right the wrongs of 2020. I was talking with somebody the other day about it. I think it was Roger Stone. We're not going to have all those mail-in ballots that we had in 2020. So I think we're going to see a far different election, but we'll find out hopefully on the night of November 5th. Or the early morning of November 6th, right?
We'll see. There are some hijinks. I've had some really horrifying stuff. 20% of all people in the swing states told me in 2020 they got at least one superfluous extra mail-in ballot at their address. 28% of all mail-in ballot voters in 2020 said they committed at least one form of fraud. And now, lately, the issue we've been having is in our polling, and no other pollster will tell you this, we have people telling us that they voted in 2020, they're going to vote again in 2024. Oh, and by the way, they're not citizens.
Oh my God.
So
unbelievable. I mean, that's what you get. That's what you get from the Biden in states like New York, when an illegal can go and get a driver's license. And car companies will insure them. It makes no sense to me. It's like we're living
They're
in
finding these people in Ohio now.
yeah, it's unbelievable. Mark
Yeah.
Mitchell, you're doing a great job. Thanks for all the great work you're doing. Where could people find your daily tracking polls or follow your work?
Go to Twitter, Rasmussen_poll. You can hit me up too, Mark_R_Mitchell. Mine are a little bit more of the hot takes and less of the numbers. And also, we're at YouTube. I go in depth into the numbers and look at the crosstabs. That's also at Rasmussen_poll.
Thanks to Mark Mitchell, and thank you all for being with us today. Please be sure to join us right back here tomorrow for the Great America Show as our quest for truth, justice, and the American way continues. Our guest will be House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan. He's going to break it down for us, what he's got up his sleeve and what he's working on before November 5th. Please join me for that tomorrow. Please be sure to follow me on Twitter at John Fawcett NY. That's John Fawcett NY. And on Truth Social at John Fawcett. Shoot me a tweet. Let me know what you want to hear more of on this show. You could also email us at info@loudobbs.com. We'll see you back here tomorrow. May God bless you. May God bless America. And may God bless the great